dice, drinks, dad jokes.
Yeah, we really need a pen or something.
Hey guys, I'm Adam Haig from 3D Games, and in this video I'll be making a diorama of the moment in the Fellowship of the Rings where the Black Rider confronts Farmer Maggot and asks him about Farmer Maggot and his house only get 20 seconds of screen time in the film, so there's not a lot of visuals to go by. Weta Workshop have this collectible version, which provides some good reference material. The part that worries me slightly is the curved roof. I'm not sure how I'll tackle that yet. I start by cutting the wall sections out of XPS extruded polystyrene. I used a hot wire cutter, but you could do this with a sharp hobby knife and a ruler. Once I was happy with the basic shape and size of the house, I cut very thin strips of foam, which I will texture to make planks. Now the tricky part, cutting circles. To do this, I've made a simple MDF jig with a nail that can be set at different increments from the notch. Simply press the nail into the foam, which can then be spun at that point. This makes it relatively easy to cut circular shapes with the hot wire cutter. I cut the circular door and the door frame, along with the gap into which it will be set on the front wall section. I trim the bottoms so that they can sit flush with the ground. To create the brick texture, I carefully measure 3mm spacings at the bottom of each wall section, then score a shallow line with my Stanley knife. I then redo these lines with a sharp pencil, which makes them more pronounced. Using a hobby knife, I then complete the pattern by carving vertical lines, being very careful to keep to the running pattern. Again, these cuts are made more pronounced with a pencil. I create a wood grain effect on the thin strips of foam by drawing lines down the length with a sharp pencil. You don't have to be too careful with this because it's the little wobbles and irregularity that creates realistic looking wooden planks. The stucco sections of the wall are textured by using a crumpled up ball of aluminum foil which is pressed into the foam. The door frame looks like it's made of 5 curved planks with tongue and groove joins. Using the pencil, I draw in the pattern, then texture with wood grain again, making sure the grain differentiates the planks. I texture the door by scoring 4 planks with the knife before drawing the same wood grain texture. I wanted the door frame to protrude only slightly from the wall, so carefully cut it thinner with the hot wire. Unfortunately, it got a bit too thin and snapped. Never mind, it will look fine once glued in place. I fixed the door frame to the wall with PVA. The door itself fits snugly into the provided hole and is itself glued in place. Next, I cut several of the planks to provide the wooden detailing. These are measured, cut, and then glued with PVA. I used some of the planks to provide framing in the corners, which also hides the wall joins. They also help to provide a strong bond between the walls. These wooden detailings really bring the structure to life. To create the chimney, I need to create an angled block. To do this, I angled the wire on my Proxen hot wire cutter after carefully measuring the bottom and top sides. Again, you could do this with a sharp knife and ruler, but it will be harder to be exact. Once I've cut all the necessary blocks, I glue them together and use a toothpick to secure them in place. I use a push pin to create the chimney spout. The brickwork on the chimney is carved using the same technique as before. I'm far less precise this time, which results in a more rustic look. Next challenge will be the roof and its tricky curved shape. I tell you what, there's nothing that grinds my gears quite like people littering. Good thing for me is I may have found a solution to my curved roof problem. I found this bit of trash on the side of the road, so I'm going to recycle it and try see if I can use it for my little maggot, farmer maggot house diorama. Let's get slicing and dicing. Okay, so I want a bit more of a curve on this, so I'm going to try using the heat gun. I create a simple wooden frame to support the roof. Then I use hot glue to fix the plastic bottle onto the frame. A groove is cut to fit the chimney and the bottle is trimmed to size. I then spray paint it for no reason other than to demonstrate why you shouldn't spray into the wind. Okay, so I've managed to mould the basic structure of the roof. Now I need to add the thatching. So that's going to sit like that, and then the chimney will just nestle in there. Okay, so now I need to lay out the thatching to go over the top of it. And for this, I'm going to use teddy bear fur. I can't remember where this came from. This stuff works great for making thatch. So yeah, I'll measure it up and let's get into it. After measuring, I roughly cut the shape of the back of the teddy bear fur before cutting it with a craft knife. Work slowly and gently with this to avoid cutting the actual fur on the other side. This will ensure you have a bit of overhang. You want to make sure that the natural direction of the fur fibres is the same direction for your thatch. So now that the roof is attached, I glue the chimney into place on the side of the house. To finish the thatch effect, I mix PVA glue and water at roughly equal quantities and paint this all over the fur. I apply this liberally to ensure that all the fur is soaked in the glue mixture. I then like to rough up the fur a bit with a fork. This helps to add more texture. I wanted to create a nice path of cobblestones. To do this, I press and smooth milliput into the shape I want. Then I use a textured roller from Green Stuff World. This makes the job very quick and easy by simply pressing firmly and rolling it along the milliput. You could do this by hand, but it will take a lot longer. I use a little water to smooth the top of the cobbles. Next it's time to make the kennels. I wanted to make a triple kennel to house all 3 of Farmer Maggot's dogs. This takes a steady hand with the hot wire cutter. I texture all sides of the kennel in the same way as the wooden planks on the house. The walls and roof are glued together with PVA. The base is left separate for now, as this will make painting easier. I give the thatch a little haircut with some nail scissors to reduce the overhang. To create the tiles on the top of the roof, I used green stuff mixed with milliput. I do this to retain some of the plastic gloss of the green stuff while increasing the volume with the relatively cheaper milliput. I roll out a long sausage shape, roughly the length of the roof. Then cut segments and mould to shape. These are placed in an overlapping pattern along the length of the roof. I used the leftover green stuff to sculpt some details, such as the well, which was frustrating. Pumpkins, which were actually very satisfying and relatively simple with a little patience. A sack of potatoes. That'll probably do for details, because I won't have mushroom left. Oh wait, yes I do. A little basket of them in fact. So I've decided I really need to push on and get painting this little bad boy. I keep adding more details to it, but at some point I've just got to bite the bullet and I've just got to start painting. And I'm going to also paint the little doggo kennel. I go ahead and prime the house, base and kennels with brown. I then paint the cobbles with successively lighter shades of grey. I base coat sections of the house, starting with the chimney, which is painted with a dark grey. The brickwork of the base of the house is painted white, and the stucco is painted a very pale cream. I then heavily dry brush the chimney with a lighter grey to bring out the texture of the bricks. To create the red brick with white mortar look, I painstakingly paint each brick with a terracotta colour. I paint random bricks with slightly different variations of tone to add to the realism. The thatch is much easier to paint. I start by painting the whole lot with a yellow ochre colour. Once dry, I add white to the previous colour and roughly dry brush to bring out the texture. I add even more white and dry brush again, this time focusing on the raised areas and edges to help define the shape and really highlight that texture. The pin, masquerading as a chimney spout, is painted terracotta. Now time for the big red door. This is painted with a deep scarlet. I add highlights with successively brighter shades of red, which is brushed lightly along the raised wood grain texture. I use the same technique with the timber sections, but with browns. I paint the roof tiles with XV88, which I then highlight by adding a little white. I use watered down Nuln oil to add a little griminess to the stucco sections of the walls. This is added mostly on the areas by the timber where grime would accumulate. Dabbing Nuln oil onto the chimney bricks works great to add depth and accentuate the texture as it runs into the cracks and recesses. Now we're ready to texture the base. I coat the area with PVA before sprinkling over a mixture of tile grout and soil. This is very messy, so it's a good idea to do this where it's easy to clean up. I let some of the grout mix spill over onto the path in places and gently brush it into the gaps between cobbles. This helps them to look like they've sunk into the earth over time. I spray the whole area with isopropyl alcohol, which activates the grout, then follow it up with a thorough spray of matte sealant. I use a paper towel to remove heavy concentrations of the matte sealant from details. Using a fine detail brush, I carefully paint PVA in between the cobbles and apply fine turf. I use hot glue to secure the well in place. I want this area of the house to be a little overgrown, so I attach a couple of 12mm grassy tufts. I glue into place fine turf of different tones along the edges of where the house will go and the edges of the board. Now it's time to add static grass using my static grass applicator. This is a lot easier to do without the house attached and getting in the way. I use a couple of different colours of static grass to keep it looking varied and natural. I go ahead and cover the board with grass, making sure to leave some patches of dirt still showing. To create a chopping block, I cut a small pine branch with my razor saw. I carefully cut a small divot into the top where the axe will go. The axe is stolen from a warrior of Rohan. PVA secures the block in place. The kennel is also glued onto its base. To add length to certain areas of grass, I gently brush PVA along the tops of the fibres before applying more static grass. I do this several times in some areas to build up the length and to keep the grass looking varied in both height and colour. Now that the static grass is applied, I can glue the house in place. I can then secure the axe with super glue before painting it. I carve some more foam to create a little bench seat, which is painted and glued in place. Obviously, Farmer Maggot needs a wheelbarrow to cart around those pumpkins, so a very fiddly little foam one is built. I go ahead and paint the little details, such as a little flower pot, the sack of potatoes, the basket of mushrooms, and the pumpkins. Now it's time to help Farmer Maggot chop some firewood. These are added to the diorama and glued in place. I almost forgot, the door needs a big shiny doorknob. This is made using a nail which is primed black before being painted bright gold. The nail is then pushed into the centre of the door. Now, no hobbit dwelling would be complete without flowers, because
all hobbits share a love of things that grow.
I go ahead and attach flowers to the board. These can be purchased in a variety of colours, and here I'm deliberately choosing colours that will contrast and stand out from their surroundings. Athonian camo shade is great for adding realistic looking weathering. I apply this to areas of the thatch roof where moisture would accumulate to create a subtle look of mildew and grime. This helps break up the uniformity of colour, adding realism. I push this look further by applying patches of fine turf medium green mixed with PVA glue. When dry, this creates a really nice looking moss effect. I want to create the impression that the ring wraith's presence is physically affecting the environment, so I apply some 6mm dead grass spreading out from the rider's base. I add more flowers to the meadow. You can never have too many flowers. Some extra individual flowers are added to the long grass patches by mixing PVA with white woodland scenics flowers and applying with a toothpick. The right hand side of the house looks a little boring, so I add a climbing tree. This is created by gluing in place an appropriate looking stick. I use flowers to hide the joint. A little super glue firmly fixes it in place. I apply hobby tack to the little branches and sections of the house where I want the foliage to stick. Then attach JTT dead vines. Some of the wispy bits are trimmed away with nail scissors. I use some of the fine turf PVA mix, then apply some Woodland Scenics coarse turf with PVA. I seal the foliage in place by using a dropper to apply matte sealant. Now it's time to finally add the details. I add some flowers to the little flower pot and glue in place. Next is the sack of potatoes, along with some extra potatoes added individually around the sack. I glue in place a couple of loose planks. Farmer Maggot must be building something. another sack by the front door, along with a basket of freshly picked mushrooms. The wheelbarrow is carefully glued down before adding the pumpkins. Now I can add the miniatures and the diorama is complete. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and there's a real sense of satisfaction when I know everything has been handcrafted. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe, and if you have any suggestions for the channel, drop a comment below. If you'd like to support the channel, using the affiliate links in the description to buy your hobby supplies is a great way to do that. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and I get a small commission which I can invest back into making content. Thanks so much for watching, and good hobbying, guys.